Welcome to chapter number 12, working with Camera Raw. I'm very excited to give you this chapter and show you the benefits of shooting Camera Raw and the advantages of editing using this format. We started off with Alt-Control-Shift on the Windows. As soon as I open Photoshop, I can get the default settings by deleting any already adjusted settings that have happened. So I'm going to go ahead and hit yes. If you're on a Mac, you can hit Command-Option-Shift as soon as you open up Photoshop, and it will give you the defaults, which the book recommends. And with the raw files, I do a lot with raw files, so I made sure I reset it so it look like it's the default settings. So we're going to first navigate to the Lesson 12 files, and we're going to go ahead and find our files, the 12start.crw and the 12an.psd, and see the differences we're going to do between them, which are pretty significant. Notice extensions, the part after the file name, are very important when dealing with raw files. Now I will say a little bit about raw files is each camera has its own particular raw file, like a Canon 6D, a Canon R6. They all have different styles of raw files. As each camera has a newer version, they will have a different, slightly its own extension for a raw file. So you have to make sure your bridge is updated to the current settings if you haven't updated in a while. Otherwise, a newer camera may not be able to open some of the raw files if your software is outdated. And this can go for any type of raw conversion if you're not using any type of Adobe software as well. Nikon, Canon, Olympus, Sony, they all have their own extension. Nikon calls theirs a .NEF. CRWs are what Canon does. Other companies have their own extension that goes for that particular raw file. Now, a camera raw file contains unprocessed picture data from a camera's digital image sensor, somewhat like undeveloped film. Raw sensor data is not converted to a standard multi-channel color image file. It's still one unprocessed channel of sensor data, and in that form it is not viewable as an image. You might then wonder, how do you view raw image files? Well, instead of a JPEG, which is very compatible with many different softwares, browsers, and the internet, a raw file has to be converted through processing to make it into the JPEG file or into another viewable file to get that finished product. Novice or basic photographers shoot with a JPEG mode. All cameras today will shoot with a JPEG mode. Well, even some cell phones nowadays will shoot with a cell phone raw camera. But for the novice who doesn't want to do the extra editing and it's just easier processing given the JPEG isn't a bad thing, but you will get a higher quality file and more ability to color correct and make changes with a raw file if you do choose to shoot that format. Now let's go ahead and look at what we can do for processing this file in Canon, such as straightening, cropping, basic adjustments. They can be added on. It's a Sidecar file. So to start, the book has us go into the Mission Lesson 12 folder. Inside here are 3 files that are raw files. We're going to go ahead and select all of them. You can click on one, hold shift and click the other, or you can just kind of drag inside a bridge, opening all the files. And I'm going to go ahead and just double click them. By default, they should open in Adobe Camera Raw. If not, you can actually right click and through the contextual menu, choose Open in Camera Raw. Now for those who are not familiar with the raw processing, first off, you get the idea of here of seeing your film strip, the preview of all the different thumbnails, and you can have hundreds of files in Adobe Camera Raw, and they will all be in the film strip preview. I can control the zoom level by actually dragging in here and making it more or less. I can also use the same shortcuts like Control plus and Control minus to zoom in and out. Or I can use the spacebar to navigate through the piece. Control 0 to fit to screen based on my screen size. I have my basic settings here, which are all the majority of the settings that most people do. We'll just use your exposure, your brights and your darks and your colors and tweaks and your white balance are in the basic settings. Some people never get past that. You can dig into and find many other different settings here for your camera settings. The histogram, just like the back of your camera has a histogram, it will show you in the raw preview mode here what the histogram is, the brights and the darks of your image, even the different colors, which is an awfully nice feature. We can toggle through a full screen mode here in the very upper right to go bigger or smaller. I typically like a full screen menu. It just makes it a nice bigger option for me. Some of the different tools here for the edit styles, the crop and straighten tools, the healing brush tools to make some corrections and changes, and I can do a few other adjustments along the way, and we'll get into some of these as we go. But take some time to explore what Adobe Camera Raw can do for you. I can give it star rankings in the bottom section to give it a ranking 1 through 5. I want to give a ranking so I know what are my better photos, what are my less quality photos. I can give a star ranking by using the click of the stars. or clicking 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 on the keyboard. I can also delete it if I don't like that file, and it will go to the trash once I'm done with my edits. I can get to before and after edits here, changing these options, going back and forth between before and after in the adjustments I've done. And if I make an adjustment, I can see before and after, the original to not, which is a nice feature. And toggling through those views. This one right here, we'll choose between preview and not, what the adjustments were before and after. And once I make my changes, I can go ahead and hit open to open it up into Photoshop, or I can hit cancel if I don't want to make the changes that I've done inside the Adobe Camera Raw, or I can hit done to accept those changes, and it will keep them into my bridge as completed, but it really will not convert them into JPEGs or do anything with them yet at this point. Now, something that can confuse people is finding how to get the right files in the right order they want. This little film strip button will allow me to see with or without the previews. I can also click in here, and I can choose how I want them to be sorted by the capture date, the file name, the star ranking, and I can organize them by different attributes. And I can even filter through, what are the higher star rankings or the lower star rankings, or different color labels, which is another setting for another time. Or I can have some organization through a filter system. Now that we've explained what the layout is so far, we're going to go ahead and change the Adobe Raw profile and choose the one that we find is the most appropriate. The idea is it's the overall color rendering of an image, a separate step combined with the adjustments that you make. You can change the raw file at any time, which is really nice. In the profile menu, we're going to change from the Adobe color, click and drag down, to Adobe landscape. And I'll change the previews, the ways the colors are blended a little bit. You can see the rich blue sky is now a little more intense. Now this setting will come in from whatever your camera setting was when you shot the picture. The camera setting might have the default, or you might have a custom setting. This profile will be interpreted from your camera settings once you captured the image. In Adobe Portrait, gives natural representation of the skin tones. Vivid. That's kind of a punchy color contrast. Monochromatic. Delivers a high quality conversion to black and white. And I can again adjust these settings to taste. We're going to go back to the Adobe Landscape menu. Now let's start to adjust the white balance. The white balance is the colors in the image. How are they represented? Does things look white, or red, or blue, or green? Some of the tint that comes along. Now each particular white balance setting is different based if you're shooting indoors or outdoors or different types of man-made light. The first set is the temperature, which is measured in kelvins and gives you the coolness or the warmness of the colors in the tone. The second component is tint, which compensates for like the magenta or a green color cast, which in some lightings you'll have a little more green or a little more magenta lighting, and you can adjust that as so. If you want to try to adjust it, you can go to many different settings. Auto would be what the camera would have recommended, and you can try different settings to see what it looks like, and that looks pretty good as shot. Another tool is the white balance tool. To do that, we have the white balance option. We have the eyedropper. I click the eyedropper tool. And to get an accurate white balance, we select something that is a white or a neutral gray. So I'm going to go ahead and recommend moving into the clouds and clicking the clouds. Now it chooses that is the white point. That cloud is white and everything else is adjusted appropriately around it. And that does make a significant change. If you click a different area of the sky or this clouds, it will look slightly different based on the particular part that we're clicking. And we can see the colors have changed quite a bit from 7600 to -14. Now if we click this white sign in the church, not on the black part, but try to click the white sign portion. Click that, and then puts it at 6100 and -10, and that's probably more accurate. 6100, -10 in the temp, but that's about right. Now we can go before and after. And that's definitely making some changes before and after by cycling in the bottom right corner. Now let's look at manual tone adjustments in Adobe Camera Raw. Contrast will make the brights and the darks more extreme or less extreme. Exposure will make everything brighter or everything darker. The highlights and shadows will control just the bright portions, the highlights. And the shadows control just the darker portions, not so much of the highlight portions. We're going to go into the edit option and choose auto. And by choosing auto, it makes some adjustments based on computer artificial intelligence to make these changes, and it actually did a pretty good job here. Bumping up the exposure, turning down the highlights. Now the auto button has gotten a lot better over the years due to the Adobe Sensia machine learning technology, which is really getting good, trained in a quick way of starting to edit automatically. Now you can always override those edits by starting to make changes to them. And then notice the auto button goes away. The book instructs us to set it to 0.5, 0 on the contrast, -20 on the highlights, 70 on the shadows, 20 on the whites, -10 on the blacks, 20 on clarity, and 20 on vibrance. You can see before and after. Pretty significant changes to the overall look of this image. The shadows are really helping take the dark portions of the tree that were in the shade and to give them some visibility without necessarily overpowering the highlights in the church steeple and in the clouds. Now we're going to go ahead and apply sharpening. We're going to go down to the Detail tab. In the Detail panel, we're going to go ahead and zoom to 100%. Control 1, which is Control 1 there, or Command 1 on a Mac to see 100%. You should do all your sharpening at 100% view size to see it at its clearest. Otherwise, you're seeing half a pixel or a quarter pixel. You're not seeing all pixel for pixel sharpness. You can use the hand tool. The space bar temporarily gives us the hand tool, or we can go to the hand tool on the toolbar and to drag through the piece. We're going to change the sharpening to 100. And I'll go ahead and click and drag this triangle open. I get more options here. I'm going to change it to 0.9 on the radius. 25 on the detail. I'm going to go to 61 on the masking. The radius determines how far out from the pixel that a sharpening is applied. For properly focused images without motion blur, a radius of 1 works actually pretty well. You might decrease the radius value for images with fine details that are precisely focused, or increase radius to help sharpen blurred details. Changing the detail to 25. Unless it's already set that way, which here it was. The detail option controls the balance between sharpening edges and textures for images with fine details. Lower values draw sharpening toward edges, leaving broad areas smooth. Higher values bring out textures in broad areas. And the masking value of 61, the masking is similar to the detail slider in that it keeps sharpening constrained along content edges. But masking is more generally useful because it isn't just for fine details. A higher masking value makes it easier to increase the sharpening value without over-sharpening noise and textures in the broad areas of the image that look smooth, such as a face or the sky. Lowering the masking value when you want sharpening to emphasize details in broad areas, such as the weave of the threads or in the fabric. Well, that's starting to look pretty good. Now the book recommends we turn down the sharpening value to 70. And it's definitely looking sharper. Now your camera raw files are saved as an XMP file. This is like a little Sidecar file. So I'm not actually making changes to this file. I'm actually adding an additional file that appends or adds to the changes to this file. So I'm not permanently damaging the raw file, which is great. If you make masked local adjustments, you might also see a .acr file. That's Adobe Camera Raw file. That would be things like your masking, dodging, burning, but those will be added on as an additional file. Now, all these three pictures of the church were taken under similar lightings, similar white balance, similar conditions, similar camera settings. So we're going to go and click the first image, which we made our adjustments to, and then we're going to right-click here on the film strip. So I'm going to go and fit this image to size of the church. I'm going to go ahead and then click and hold on the film strip button. This pops up a contextual menu. I'm going to go to Select All. I could also use Control A as the shortcut. Now all three of my images are selected. Now I'm going to go ahead and click and hold the button again. I'm going to go up to Sync Settings, or Alt-S. It pops up this menu. And I can choose which settings I want to synchronize or not. Even though it didn't make any changes in some of the color mixer, color grading, and other options, it will by default add all the same changes to each of them. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. And notice it made changes to all 3 images. Now the beautiful thing about Raw is if I shot 1 image or if I shot 100 images under similar lighting, similar camera settings, I can make all those as a large batch and have 100 images edited to match these color settings if I hadn't done anything different in camera. Now that I've done my changes, I need to save these to new types of files. I'm going to save them as a JPEG file. So with all 3 of my files selected, I go up to the right corner here and I can convert and save images button. It'll pop up a menu. Then I can go ahead and change some file settings here. The book instructions go to save in same location. In the file naming area, we're going to choose document name. We're going to choose a JPEG extension. I'm going to start with the 0, 1 and the numbering. We're going to set a quality to 8 or 9 in the high setting. The color space, we're going to go ahead and change it to standard RGB, sRGB. And then to the image resizing, we're going to go ahead and click in here. Click the checkbox, resize to fit. We're going to drag down the width and height down to long side. And we're going to type in 800 pixels. And this makes it so whether it's a horizontal or a vertical picture, the longest side will become 800 pixels. I'm going to choose the resolution of 72 pixels per square inch. And then we're going to go ahead into the top and click Save. It will process out for a few seconds, maybe a little longer if your computer's slower. And now all these are actually edited as save files. And we go down to the right portion of Adobe Camera under Open. I'm going to click and drag and hold Open as Object. And what this is going to do is open it into Photoshop as a smart object. We can notice here there's a smart object file. We do talk about that in other chapters with a smart object here. Now I'm going to go into File, Save As. I'm going to type it as missions-final.psd. I'm going to go ahead and hit Save. Now the beautiful thing about a smart object here is I make adjustments. Let's go ahead and paint on here. I can't do it because it's a smart object. I'll make a new layer. As a new layer, I go ahead and do more edits to my file, yada yada. Make changes here. Let's go ahead and make other adjustments. But I can go back to my original file. I can double click it and the smart object will open up back in Adobe Camera Raw and it can make the same adjustments that I had, the settings, the white balance, all those basic settings can be adjusted here. I go ahead and hit OK. And it will make that change automatically to my Photoshop file. It's remembering that Sidecar attachment file, and I can make the adjustments to the high quality RAW file and bring them into my Photoshop file. For the second part of the lesson, we're going to go ahead and retouch a portrait in Adobe Camera Raw. We're going to go ahead and take this picture of the bride. Where this is an NEF file, that's a Nikon RAW file. And we're going to go ahead and double click it open. It'll open in Adobe Camera Raw. In Adobe Camera Raw, it pops up. We're going to go ahead and first adjust the profile. In the edit option, we're going to go ahead and change from Adobe Color to Adobe Portrait to add a little more color-friendly option for the portrait. In the Basics tab, we're going to go ahead and click the white balance eyedropper tool. And we're going to go ahead and click somewhere on her white dress. That'll adjust the colors to match that is white and the rest appropriately. So it does warm it up a little bit. Change that color balance goes from 3150 to 3450. A fairly minor number change, but it does make a significantly warming up of the bride, making it a little more flattering light. And we're going to go ahead and click the film button. Click it once to hide it. Because we only have one image here, I want to see this a little bit larger than the smaller version with all the thumbnails attached. So I see the one image a little bit larger to fit my screen better. I'm going to go back to my options, and I'm going to hit Auto. And to make some auto changes to that adjustment. Darkens the eyelashes, increases the contrast a little bit, drops down the highlights a bit. Now from this point, we're going to go ahead and adjust the automatic sliders. We're going to go ahead and put the exposure back to 0. We're going to put the contrast to -20. We're going to set the clarity to 8. And that makes a few more adjustments to override the automatic sense. Now we're going to use the Content Aware Remove tool to correct blemishes. In the toolbar, up on the right side here, we're going to go ahead and click the Band-Aid tool, which is the healing icon. And underneath our histogram now are the options of the healing tools. We're going to make sure that the content aware remove option is on, and it is selected. We'll go ahead and zoom into 100%. To see pixel for pixel. And in the healing brush settings, we can go ahead and change it to 15 on the size and 100 on the opacity. That changes the size of my brush. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on one of the spots on the face. And it does help remove some of those blemishes on the face. Now I'll go to the right side of this column here. We have the options. I can hit show overlay and it will show the portions that I've actually edited. Now I can click on one and I can make more adjustments into the future. If I wanted to edit an additional one, I could play with the options and adjust those a little bit by hitting show overlay. I'm going to turn show overlay off. I'm going to go ahead and click on a few areas of her face just to remove some blemishes. And it does a pretty good job of removing her blemishes. Personally, I would probably use a little bit smaller brush. The book says to do a 15 setting. I might get a little bit smaller personally, but the book does say to use 15. And as I click on these portions, it just, using artificial intelligence in the content aware, starts to just touch up lots of little blemishes. I can click up here, drag down, clicking to where you want a smooth skin, dragging down. And that's looking much better. Now we're going to enhance the face with masked adjustments. Now a mask are these changes that are temporarily done. They're not permanently damaging the file. We want to go and make sure we can see the eyes, which we can. If not, you can use the spacebar to navigate through and see the eyes nice and close. Clicking the masking icon here, shortcut is the letter M. We're going to use a brush icon. We're going to click brush. And we're going to change our settings to 2 on the size, 100 to feathered, 50 on the flow, 100 on the density, and we're going to make sure the auto mask is turned off. And that matches about the size of the iris on her eyes. And we're going to bump the saturation on my settings here. And we're going to go ahead and bump up the saturation settings to 70. I'm going to drag the brush over her iris. And click and drag in each eye to increase the blues that were already a little bit there naturally in her eye. About like that. Now I can adjust it more or less to make it even go black and white if I wanted. But the book has us go to 70 on the saturation. Just a subtle adjustment at this point. Now we see mask 1 is here. We're going to go ahead and double click on the mask. And it will show you, when you hover over it, the red portion, kind of where it's actually been drawing on the eyes. We're going to go ahead and click on the mask name. We're going to call it Eyes, Irises. And hit OK. We're going to go ahead and have the Show Overlay button on. That will show that hovering over the red portion that we've painted. It's been painted onto her eyes. And I can adjust that if I want by clicking on the brush and making that adjustment, but I don't want to do that. I want to keep it on her eyes. Now we're going to go ahead and create a new adjustment. Create a new mask at the top. We're going to do a new brush adjustment. The shortcut for this is the letter K. Now we're going to turn the saturation down to a -50 on the new mask. And we're going to brush the corner of the eyes down. We're going to go ahead and change this by double clicking it to eye corners and hit OK. Now we're going to use another brush adjustment to brighten areas around the eyes. We'll go ahead and hit New Mask, or we can hit the letter K. I'm going to bump up the exposure to a 0.5. And we're going to brush over the white areas of the eye, changing the whites of the eye. Bumped it up about a 0.5, half a stop. And we're going to double click this one and name it Eye Brighten. And hit OK. Well, if we feel it's a little bit too strong or not too strong, we can turn the Show Overlay off and we can start to brighten it up more or less to make those eyes a little whiter. You need a little bit of bloodshot aspect can start to come out. At some point it looks creepy, but at some point we can choose to brighten up those irises and the whites of the eye just a little bit. Salt and pepper to taste. And that looks a little better before and after. Starting to make some significant changes to the picture. Now we're going to smooth some skin texture. Now to do that, we're going to go ahead and go to the... we're going to go ahead and create a new mask. And we're going to create Select People. And we zoom out a little bit, Control 0, fit screen. Now it's doing a pretty good job of selecting the entire person. The artificial intelligence in this is getting pretty good. It's identified person 1, entire person. But we don't necessarily want to do the entire person. We want to go ahead and select face skin and body skin. Select just her skin tones and not the rest of her. You go ahead and hit Create. Now it has selected the mask. The next step for the book is to go ahead and to click into our settings under the mask settings. And we're going to go down to the effects panel. And under the effects panel, we're going to go ahead and turn down the texture to a -30. Now, if we turn it on all the way, you can definitely see the skin is softened between 0 and 100. There's some significant changes. We don't want to go too extreme. We're going to go to a -30. And this has softened the skin quite a bit. Now, a positive number would have actually given us a little more of a gritty feel. It would definitely not be as flattering on our skin tones. All the little imperfections are exaggerated. But a negative pattern will give it a very smooth, silky skin. And then we're going to go to the mask setting. We're going to double click it. And we're going to name it Skin. And press OK. There you have it. You've opened up Adobe Camera Raw through Bridge and performed portrait retouching without needing any additional Photoshop work. If you go ahead and need a finished copy to distribute, you can just click the Save icon as you did with the missions building. If you need a saved file, you can go ahead and hit the Save icon like we did with the missions building and save your work. Thanks for watching Chapter 12, Working with Raw Files. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more videos just like this one on how to make your pictures better in just a few seconds, hit subscribe and make sure you smash that like button. Thanks for watching.